This is 10 Questions to Cyber Resilience, brought to you by Assurance IT. Released twice per month, every episode brings you one step closer to cyber resilience by hearing how IT leaders are practicing cybersecurity. Resources mentioned in the episode can be found in the show notes. If you're ready to take your cyber resilience to the next level, be sure to subscribe so you can catch every episode.
All right. Good day, everyone, and welcome to our podcast here. We typically call it 10 Questions to Cyber Resilience, but today we're probably not going to get through 10 questions because we have an amazing topic with an amazing friend and a guest speaker here today. For those who don't know Terry, which I find it hard to believe, I consider him a colleague, I consider him a friend, a peer, cybersecurity expert, best-selling author,
good-looking,
internationally known, keynote speaker. He's been around a long time. He's been on television. He's been on a whole bunch of radio shows. I think I did a good job of introducing Terry, but Terry, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can jump into
OnlyFans sensation.
Well, you didn't. I didn't know about that one, man. Can we talk about that one? That would be interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Terry, yeah, go ahead. Let's hear a little bit about yourself and how you got from your IT career to where you are today. Before we jump in.
So, I've been in IT for over 25 years. The largest company I worked for previously was called Novell. So if you're old enough like me, you may have heard of NetWare, GroupWise, Border Manager. Like this was a software used to dominate the network world back in the 90s, early 2000s. So back in 2003, I started getting inspired by watching shows like CSI and 24. I was like, how does Chloe O'Brien breaking all these systems so fast? Remember 24 with Jack Bauer?
Of course.
So that's when I learned that there was a course called the Certified Ethical Hacker. And with that knowledge, so I got the privilege of training with the FBI, the CIA, Navy SEALs that were in the course in Washington. So armed with the knowledge of how the hackers get in, I felt it was my duty to train the general public on how to keep safe online. And so I started putting out a lot of content about how to avoid, started doing a lot of penetration testing, things like this. So obviously my name started getting around. And now I'm a go-to person for most of the media outlets across Canada. I do a lot of keynote talks around the world. And one of the challenges that I had was I couldn't be in 50 places at once. So that's why I took everything from my head, put it into a digital product called Internet Safety University, which today has just under 40,000 students in it from 150 countries. Yeah. And so I try to keep them up to date of latest scams and frauds to watch out for. And then wrote a book that was 7 years in the making because I had no intention to write a book. So I was like, no, you need to write a book. I'm like, why am I going to write a book when I do everything in video format? And this book will probably be obsolete by the time it hits the shelf. And sure enough, today, 4 years later, it actually still is on the bestseller list, on the Amazon bestseller.
I see that, and congratulations on that. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of time, I'm sure. So, how do you find the time to do all this, Terry? I mean,
well, I have a team, right? So one of my I have a ghostwriter I've been working with since 2008. So basically, a lot of the content I write is for first person. My content is made for video, so we have to rewrite that for a book format or a blog, something like this. So he comes in and rewrites it for me like in a proper professional version of it, and I authorize it and we go.
Yeah, you know what I have to say is very admirable what you've done for the community, for the industry, for Canadians. I see you in and about everywhere on television, like I said, and I know you've been traveling a lot, so that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of obviously physical activity to get in and around.
Haven't slept in 4 years, man.
Yeah, and cybersecurity business is keeping us alive and busy, right? So I guess we have to be thankful for that, grateful for that. At the same time, it sometimes becomes a little bit stressful. So it's funny because I know you and I we actually were at an event a few weeks ago, and this is where we started talking about this. I said, Terry, you need to come on my podcast. It's been a while in the making, and I finally had you in the room, and I had you captive, and you couldn't say no. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So today. We were talking about different types of attacks, and every day I get asked about the type of attacks that happen, the attack surfaces. What I wanted to talk to you about today specifically, and again, we're not going to do 10 questions here, but we're going to talk about a situation or an experience. Everyone knows or hears about these ransomware attacks, right? Yeah. Everyone hears about your files getting encrypted or getting locked out, or not having access to the critical data in your enterprise. But I wanted you to I wanted to have this conversation with you about the anatomy of a ransomware attack. What does it look like from conception, from the time that the threat actor's thinking about this attack to the time where we've actually been able to recover from that attack?
Okay.
And I know you've been through these situations before, so maybe take us through some of that.
Yeah. So there's pretty much like there's a couple of methods that scam or cyber criminals are going to target you. One of them could just be, okay, show me everybody who's got a vulnerable firewall, whatever it is, and they cast this wide net to thousands or tens of thousands of people, and whoever's a victim is a victim. And there's another way where you're going to be more state sponsored, where you're specifically targeted because you're very lucrative. You have a lot of information it's worth a lot of money. So that's how they would pretty much target you. But we're seeing things like attacks that could have been so avoided. A lot of companies don't realize what their attack surface is like. So they don't realize they have their exposed end of life software. They have remote access enabled on it. They have all these vulnerabilities that exist that they're not even aware of because a lot of times they work with IT companies, and IT companies are not cybersecurity experts, right? They're your family doctor, right? Think of your family doctor. Would you ever ask your family doctor to perform laser eye surgery on you? Most people would say no.
That's a very good analogy. I like that.
So that's where an MSP would want to partner up with a cybersecurity firm to help complement them, and like we'll find all the stuff to fix up, and they'll implement it.
Very good. So what you're saying is work with specialists in the field, someone who understands the potential risks, the potential attack vectors, and that could help you identify them, I guess, because a lot of companies are kind of flying blind, right? They just keep, like if I'm a manufacturing company or if I'm a transportation company and I just care about my trucks getting on the road and delivering that product, right? We often forget about the importance of the data and the underlying technology that's actually making that company function. So
Correct.
how do we remind those individuals that a ransomware attack can, in fact, cripple their company?
A lot of times it's through education. And, going back to the whole MSP thing, we work with a lot of companies that have been working with their MSP for 9, 10, 15 years, and they trust everything they say. And no matter what we say as cybersecurity experts, they still doubt us and go back to their IT guys. So it gets to a point where we have to really get more aggressive, where we show them their vulnerabilities. And I'll give you a real example. We're working with a client right now who's being hacked and frauded, potentially from a previous IT guy. So we do an attack surface report on them, show them all their vulnerabilities. There are a lot of red. I was getting sunburned from the red from the report. Okay. And when we also ran an attack surface report against the MSP, they're even worse off than the customer. So now there's they have to be brought to the table. So we challenge them on these things. And they have to understand that we're not out there to get their jobs. We're there to work with you because we don't want the IT jobs anymore. We want to just stick with cyber. We specialize in that and work with the MSP. So once they figure out what they don't know, then we can work closer together and patch these things up.
So let's take it from the threat actor perspective right now. So the threat actor knows that there's all these vulnerabilities that exist in the enterprise, right?
Yep.
And they know that there's a lot of weak links, and I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, but in most cases, I'd say 90%, right? Statistically speaking, 90% of the attacks are because of a human error of some sort. Someone clicked on a bad email or a bad link. So the threat actor is essentially trying to find those vulnerabilities, individuals, or perhaps a backdoor into an organization, and then are they attacking immediately, or are they, taking their time to, kind of understand the landscape to make sure that their attack is actually effective?
That's a great question. So here's how it typically works. A lot of the management still believe that, if I get a new firewall, if I get encryption, I get stronger passwords or MFA, I'm safe. And they don't realize that cyber criminals are not spending time trying to hack your firewall and get detected when all they have to do is send a crafted email to one of your employees, have them click on a link they're not supposed to, and now they've become an insider to your network. So they've bypassed your initial security. And a lot of companies don't have the proper detection technology in place in order as a hacker in there. And a lot of folks don't realize that the average time that a hacker is in your system undetected is 286 days.
Incredible.
That's the average right now.
Days. Wow.
And a lot of times they get discovered because they've made an error. They've launched an exploit they weren't supposed to, set off an alarm. The IT guy finally saw it. Then he started investigating. He's noticed a whole bunch of problems. And they didn't realize that, they're not looking at logs. And if they are collecting logs, they're just collecting event data. And then when you go back to it, it's like, oh yeah, we got breached 7 months ago, but we never know. And that's what happens when the detective is a hacker in there, finally, they don't have a proper response plan to get the hacker out once he's been detected. So all the playbooks, all the incident response playbooks have to be done or rewritten to adapt to today's cyber threats.
286 days.
Yeah, that's the average right now.
I mean, so imagine having a rodent problem. I hate to use this analogy, but a rodent problem in your house for 286 days before you figured it out.
Yeah.
That could be disastrous.
Yeah. And during that time, like you mentioned, they're in there discovering your whole network. They're looking at people's inboxes. They're cracking passwords, and they're possibly even copying out your data slowly. And because their job is to have what's called a double extortion tactic, where, okay, they're in your system for a long period of time. And once they feel they have everything they need, they're going to launch the ransomware attack. That's not immediate. It's not like you're just going to, get popped one day and all of a sudden you get hacked and you're ransomed. They're in there discovering your network for a period of time, and then they launch the ransomware attack. So if you are able to recover from backup, they've already have a copy of your data. And this way they say, okay, well, you looks like you recovered from your backup, but if you don't pay us anyway, we're going to leak this data. And that's going to cause lawsuits. You might get regulatory fines. You get loss of trust from businesses. It's still going to cost a lot of money. And, the average data breach in Canada, starts off at $1 million. And it usually trends around 6 million by the time you're done. And I actually didn't believe that number at first. And I'll give you another example. We did a test on a company a while back. We did a $10,000 penetration test. Sent the report to the management, and I get a call maybe 2 days later. Terry, are you in my inbox? I'm like, no. They're like, shit, we're being hacked. And next, the hackers had access to his inbox, which included the report that we just provided,
My goodness.
which showed all the other vulnerabilities. And then they got into those systems and wreaked havoc on it. And then they got access to their clients' passwords. So it snowballed from there. So it went from a $10,000 pen test to millions of dollars in fees.
Wow. So those are what we call indirect or direct or indirect costs. Direct costs associated to either paying the ransom or the cost of the insurance or the incident response, and then indirect costs when you talk about regulatory fines, reputational loss, something that's eyebrow raising for the CFOs nowadays.
Yeah.
But I just want to dial it back a bit. I think it's important that people realize that hackers or these threat actors or cyber criminals, these are just not one-time things. They're living in your environment for the longest period of time. And then they're doing that double extortion technique to make sure that when they do drop that bomb, for lack of a better term, it really is going to be effective for them, so that they can either collect money from you guys, from the customer, and or extort them in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So that's where I think people need to realize that they need to be watching their, a lot of people are just watching the glass 24/7, but they're not looking back and looking at trends, which I think is something that more and more important for companies to start looking for any anomalous behavior that may have happened. And again, it's all about advising your employees. Any behavior that you might see that could be, deemed, a little out of the ordinary or extraordinary, I think it needs to be reported. So when a company does get breached, I know you've been brought into these situations on many, many, many occasions. Let's play the psychology here. What's the first thing that you see when a company, picks up the phone and says, "Hey, Terry, we got breached. Our files are locked." How does that play out, and how do you see that typically happening?
All right. So typically it's mayhem, it's panic. And what usually happens is that the IT department is usually in there reinstalling machines already before the phone call gets to me. And that's really bad, because if you're dealing with cyber insurance and these IT guys are reinstalling the environment, you're destroying evidence. So when incident responders like us go in and we try to uncover, what was taken, what was accessed, we try to find what's called patient zero. We can't necessarily conclude the report because the evidence has been destroyed. And guess who's going to be stuck with the bill? It's going to be the customer. The insurance won't pay it. So if they do, it's going to be a real big fight for you to get that money, because you don't have the basics in place. So
that's a very good point. Cyber insurance is gonna walk away and say, well, you guys didn't give us a chance to figure this out, because and cyber insurance companies are in the business of making money.
Yeah.
So if they can avoid paying, and we're seeing this more and more often, right? Exclusion lists are getting longer, policies are being taken away. So that's a very important point. So let's double click on that. So if you are listening and you are a victim of a breach, be sure to have a proper incident response plan, which doesn't mean that you start reinstalling machines. It means that you pick up the phone and you call the right people, right?
That's right.
So who would that be, Terry?
We had a situation also, like, that when we were looking at someone's incident response plan, it was like, oh yeah, call this group. And they didn't even know that they would have received this call had an incident occurred, and they weren't even ready for it. So I'm like, wait a second, are you sure this is all correct
So
here?
there's zero context there. Like you
There's
calling
zero context.
it's like calling, you have a flood at your house and you call, the incident response people, for lack of a better term. Again, they come in, they rip out your entire basement, they just put those big heaters if you have a flood or whatever.
Yep.
But I mean, they don't really ask any questions. They just do their job. And
Correct.
in the context of IT, you need to have that context. You need to understand the environment. This is what I tell a lot of customers. I mean, if you're looking for a service, it's not a service that you're going to use if in case something happens. The individuals or the team that you're going to bring in need to intimately know your environment, because
Correct.
when they come in, they got to tiptoe around stuff to make sure they're not breaking or destroying evidence.
That's it.
And the insurance company. So would the insurance company be your first call?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that can happen on the. First of all, the management team needs to be aware of it. All the stakeholders, shareholders need to be aware of it. IT department needs to be aware of it because they need to understand, what machines were compromised. What did that have access to, that user account? What was taken? Is all the files encrypted, or is it just a portion of it? We had a situation a couple of years ago where there was this poor guy. I think it was his 6th or 7th month on the job. He was taken over as the IT manager, and they got hit with a ransomware attack, which affected 800 computers. So what they did was they panicked and went and unplugged 800 computers amongst multiple offices. So when incident responders come in, usually we deploy software that allows us to triage the information quicker instead of going from computer to computer. Because if we have to go manually one by one, you've just extended the mandate by months.
Right.
So that's what happened. We had to go to each machine individually to collect this information. And that's why you need to have proper what's called EDR technology. So you may have heard names like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Field Effect. Those are all technologies that allow us to secure the machine if ever a ransomware occurs. Because we're seeing a lot of it's called fileless malware. It's where a user receives an email with a Word document attached. And so the first email filtering detects it. There's no threat, so it lets it through. You may have antivirus on your machine, not EDR. You may have antivirus. It scans it, no threat, lets it through. So the user opens up the document, and you know how you get that little pop-up, you want to enable macros? So like usual, they'll say, yeah, I want to enable because I want to be able to modify the document. The moment they enable it, the Word is going to call back the threat actor system, download a payload, and start executing. So when you have EDR, which is endpoint detection and response technology, which is far more superior than antivirus, it'll say, why is Word trying to open up a command prompt and starts launching PowerShell scripts? This is not normal, cuts off the process. So you need to have advanced technology like that in place to stop these advanced threats.
To monitor behavior versus a definition of potential attacks, which is traditional antivirus.
Yeah.
So that's very important. So EDR, of course, which I think a lot of cyber insurers right now are putting as a requirement, frankly. I think they're not going to give you a policy if you don't have an EDR.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward now. So you've been called in for the incident. You're able to isolate the issue. You've been able to, or you've been able to isolate, and then what's the next step? Do you restore from backup? Are you confident that backups haven't been encrypted? Because we're seeing a lot of backup systems right now being encrypted as well. So what brings you from the point of isolating to the point how do we restore here?
Okay, so once the damage has been done and the smoke settles, we want to know how this thing got in here, because that's usually the number one question. The manager's like, how on earth could this have happened? Well, you and I put out a lot of educational content that the business owners should have been well aware how this stuff happens, and it just frustrates me when they ask that question. And now we have to uncover what happened. Was there vulnerabilities that could have been avoided? Because now we're also seeing what are called lay of the land attacks, which means that cyber criminals are using legitimate tools against you to encrypt you. So in a real example, there was a firewall vendor that had a lot of flaws that came out a couple of years ago, like a lot of them. And the cyber criminals accessed an exploit, got through to their system, And then they created an administrative user in Active Directory. They enabled BitLocker, and they BitLocked 400 computers with their own key code, which mean, and they wanted $10,000 per machine. So in order to, that'd be like $4 million to unlock your environment.
So this looks like normal behavior to any EDR system.
Yeah, it's a legitimate tool. So they're
Right.
using all these tactics to get past. So that's it. So once the dust settles, we want to uncover how this happened, how we could avoid it in the future. Because in a lot of cases, like you mentioned, backup is encrypted. And if you don't have your backup, if you're a small business, you might fold within 6 months of this attack, right? You're going to run out of cash because it's very expensive because you won't have all your data back as well. So you want to have what's called a 3-2-1 strategy for your backups. You want to have 3 copies at all times. 2 of them could be on site. One of them has to be backed up either in the cloud or off site. So this way you have access to it. And then you need to rebuild the environment if you get hit with a ransomware attack, because the golden keys for Active Directory have been stolen, which means they can come back at a later date. So we had a situation where we deployed some of the latest EDR technology in an environment. So we rebuilt it, deployed EDR, and the IT guy went to connect back to the network to transfer over the data. Next, you know, the entire environment got reinfected again. Like, wait a second, this is like the top-notch EDR software. How is this even possible? Start over, rebuild from scratch, connects back to the cable to bring over the backup, reinfected again. We're like, what on earth? And that's when we uncovered.
You were answering my next question, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I like that.
So this is where we uncovered that the machine he was using to transfer over the data didn't have the agent on it. His machine had the ransomware infector on it. So obviously, when you connect back to another environment, it's going to go and reinfect that environment. And because the ransomware didn't launch from a machine that had EDR on it, it's not going to know what to do with it. It lets it through. So they need to be aware of all these things.
So you mentioned Active Directory, and the goal here was just to kind of look at the different attack surfaces. Can you just comment a little bit about the attacks on Active Directory? You mentioned that if an Active Directory is compromised, I mean, just restoring it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the threat actors out, right? You have to actually rebuild. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you need to rebuild the whole Active Directory. So you can export your user list, but you have to reassign all the rights, give all the new IDs. Everything has to be redone from scratch. It's a very tedious process. They don't realize that. They just think, okay, we'll just keep what we have and we'll deploy, an EDR and we're safe. No, you need to really clean up the environment, rebuild it. And that's when you see like municipalities that get hacked, they're still not up and running within 6 months after that attack. That's crazy. So you need to have better process in place.
Right. Okay. So, and in your experience, what happens if a backup is encrypted? I mean, so you're saying that you have to have that tertiary copy of the backups. I mean, that's a given right now. 3-2-1, that would be your safeguard. It has to be offsite, offline, what we call air gapped.
Yep.
Right. So having that data which can be restored. And another thing that I think is important to mention is a lot of customers, they have these mechanisms in place. It's a checkbox. Yeah, we got the data offsite. But when I go into their environment, I say, okay, well, when's the last time you actually did a restore test? Or when's the last time you actually had an incident response exercise?
Yeah.
And I think that's where customers fall down, is because they don't have the time to actually do all this stuff. So when they finally get all these check boxes done, they feel like, okay, we've achieved our goal. But there's the whole exercise of, well, have you tested this? Like, no IT person in the world wants to be woken up at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning being told that their ERP or their finance system is down before end of month or whatever. It's just not what we want. So I think that's another area that I'd like to stress. And so what are you seeing when it comes to actual preparedness, like being able to say, okay, I've done those exercises. Where are we at as an industry?
So going back to that poor soul I was talking about a few minutes ago, with the 800 machines, he had a 3-2-1 strategy. So his third strategy was actual tape, the wheel-to-wheel tapes.
Yeah.
And so what happened was when his backup server got encrypted, and just another thing you should know too is when a database server gets encrypted, it actually messes up the tables. So just bringing it back online won't be enough. It's going to be scrambled. Like the data won't be perfect. So you need to have a proper restore on there. But this poor soul, his 2 on-site backups were encrypted. And because that database server with the tape backup was also encrypted and corrupted, the moment he brought his tapes in, which I think the data was like 2 months old, brought the tapes in, and because the database was corrupted, he had to re-index the entire tapes. You re-index the full version and then all the incrementals.
Wow.
That would have taken weeks to do. So we had to go to an outsource company, like one of these clean labs, to restore the data right off the mechanism.
Wow. So again, not being prepared, not knowing how that activity would look like in a real life scenario.
Yeah.
So we take, I mean, I'm a big proponent, obviously, of having backup and offsite and obviously having air gap. But you can have as many backups as you want. The problem is how long does it take to restore, right? And I think that's the big question when we go to customers and we ask them, what's your RTO, RPO? And sometimes we get a blank stare, and that worries us. And then sometimes we actually, see some customers who say, no, we've gone through the test, and that's encouraging because even insurance companies, I mean, cyber insurance companies are asking more and more, right? They want to know, when's your, what does an incident response plan look like? How often is it tested? So these are pretty basic things, I would say, but again, it's just lacking time. Sometimes
here's a
lacking
question I'd like to
resources.
throw out to the listeners and the audience is that we're dealing with here's a real situation we're dealing with. This customer didn't answer correctly all of his cyber insurance questions. Are you doing this, 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 this? He answers yes, and we know for a fact he's not. And their argument is like, well, the cyber insurance didn't ask for it. Right? So that if ever a breach occurs and the questions get asked, do you have MFA? No. Do you have a backup strategy? No. Do you have EDR? No. Are you monitoring your logs 24/7? No. So which means you're negligent. So do you think the insurance company is going to pay out? Yes or no? So answer in the comments below.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know what? And we're seeing a lot of pushback from insurance companies, and customers are calling us, and their premiums are skyrocketing. They're skyrocketing year over year, and a lot of exclusions are being put in there, and they're being mandated to define or show an actual plan of improvement with with timelines. In some cases, we have customers come to us and say, "Hey, Luigi, look, we need to buy an EDR by this date, or else our cyber insurance is going to go away." And we need a formal plan to do X, Y, Z. So it's encouraging, but at the same time, I mean, it's a little bit discouraging to know that it only happens because you're forced to do it. So I mean, yeah, this is again, I think this is what keeps us busy on a day to day. Before we head out, I know we can talk about this for hours, but Terry, you mentioned earlier on that you obviously have your online university. I'd like to talk a little bit about that because if customers can benefit from that, if individuals who are watching can benefit from what you're offering, hey, let's by all means, this is what we're here for.
Okay, so Internet Safety University was designed for the general public because we already have the knows befores of the world and such. So their stuff is fantastic for the corporate training. The feedback we're getting right now is that they can't use this information at home. It's like they're forced to do it at work. And a lot of times they just let the video play, go do their laundry, they come back, the video's done, they answer a couple
they don't
questions,
do that, Terry. They don't do that.
I mean, sorry, that's not what I meant. So my philosophy has always been, since 2005, was that if I can train Mr. and Mrs. non-technical person at home on how to secure their machines, like how to know if their computer's been hacked, how to lock down their Instagram, how to lock down their Facebook, how to create strong passwords, how to know if they, how to identify a phishing email. If they can know this at home, they'll bring that knowledge to the workplace. And it has to be done in an edutainment format. So it has to be educational and entertaining as much as possible to keep their attention. Because as you know, cybersecurity is dry, right? It's not a very fun topic.
We'll definitely share that information with the audience. But so it's online, it's accessible, smartphone, PC.
Yep.
It's
there's also
self-paced.
there's also another component to this. So we launched a mobile app called Fraudster, which is available both on Apple and Android. Because one of the comments that I've always been getting from users was, Terry, I don't have time to watch your videos. I don't have time to read your blogs. I don't have time to read your books. But if I had you in my pocket, I'd be so much better. I'm like, how on earth am I going to pull that off? That thing's been 7 years in the making, by the way. I'm like, how on earth am I going to add value and utility for these users to make it as valuable as possible? So this thing launched about 2 years ago. And now we can push notify you of latest scams and frauds to watch out for. So you have it right there in your pocket.
That's very, really good. I've seen your work, Terry, and your work ethic is admirable, man. You've been pushing the industry a lot here. And before we go, so again, I just want to remind people, it's all about culture, right? I think like you hit the nail on the head there. Like if you're doing this at home, then it should naturally happen at the office. And I think that's where we're lacking. I think that, we need to remember that at home, we are individuals, we're sharing data online all the time. We're accessing things, nonstop, and we're often giving away, our privacy without even knowing it. So I think from a culture perspective, if individuals were to realize that, I think the enterprise culture would actually increase. We'd actually have more safety, right?
Yep.
I think that's important. I think more and more, especially with the younger generation being on social all the time. Offline, though, I definitely want to know about how much money you're making on OnlyFans, because that's going to be interesting.
Pays the bills. Like,
This is going to be, this is going to be chopped up and used against you, maybe, right? You better be careful.
Penetration test. Subscribe.
Terry, it's been an honor and a privilege to speak with you today. We're going to definitely put this out on our social channels, and we're going to put some of the links to your book, to your online university, here in the chat window. Again, if you guys need to reach, how can people reach you, Terry, if they want to either pen test or they want your services?
Obviously, the easiest one is www.cyologylabs.com. Or if you want to have book a meeting with me directly, you can go to www.talktoterrycutler.com. That's the easiest way. Book a consultation there, and then we will talk about what you need.
Fantastic, Terry. That's awesome. You're available on every platform, so that's amazing. I know you're not easy to get, but if you guys need an expert in cybersecurity, Terry's the man to go to.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Terry.
That's the other misconception too. They think that I'm a one-man show, but there's actually a big team behind me.
Oh, I see. Yeah, to do all the work you do, I know there's a team behind you, man. That's for sure.
Tip of the iceberg.
Thanks a lot, Terry. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.